Yes, I'm Gary Smith. I'm currently the president of the ISSS, the International Society for System Sciences. But I'm not an ISSS person, I'm a systems person. Okay, I'm also a member of the COSI, operations research. I have a great interest in DSM and metaphorical. My day job, I'm the overall architect for engineering processes at Airbus Defence and Space, and that deals with all sorts of stuff, very diverse. So spacecraft, constellations that start, communications infrastructure across satellites, secure communications, cyber systems, border security, military aircraft, all sorts of stuff. It's very, very diverse. My last operational role, I was the lead systems architect for the Saudi Arabian North Border Protection System, which is 800 kilometers of border control with Iraq. It includes command and control, laser, rangefinders, radar, all sorts of stuff. By background, originally I was a chemist. I got involved with the ISSS about 11, 12 years ago through INCOSI, the International Council on Systems Engineering, because the systems engineering discipline were basically looking for the scientific foundations of their discipline. And that's something that I've been pursuing continuously since then. I've given a couple of talks on AI before in the systems engineering forum, but I've been very surprised by the progress that's been made with large language models, especially the generative ones over the last couple of years. It took me completely by surprise. But 4 or 5 years ago, I gave a talk which was basically explaining how we should be using augmented intelligence to support our decision making, because the world is far beyond what we can manage anymore, and we need help. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm also going to talk about the general human activity system, which is a universal model for our systems engagement across everything that we do. There's a lot of parallels actually with the last talk, which is really interesting. So I'll follow up with you on that afterwards. So here we go. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe I'll just press the button. There we go. Yeah, so one of the things that was mentioned on Metaphor was this dilemma of Kafka's room versus Ava's smile, and this is quite interesting because they're metaphors for two different systemic pathologies that we experience an awful lot in our world at the moment. So for anyone who's working in a large organization, you will notice that things are becoming much more procedural and process oriented. The bureaucracy is increasing, and we're all becoming essentially robots within those. Well, they'd like us all to be robots, in their organizations. And the other one is Ava's smile, which is basically where the robot gives an impression of emotional content, but actually behind the scenes, there's nothing there. Yeah. And I was thinking about this earlier today. Actually, I see this in some of our managers as well. Yeah. They give this pretense of caring, but actually I don't really believe they are. Yeah. And what I'm seeing in organizations is that the people who are rising in the management chain are those kind of people. And there's a word for that kind of people. They're psychopaths. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. It's not just AI that do this, it's people as well. So I mentioned that the world is now far beyond our capability to manage, and there's this model, if you like, of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we see it everywhere. We see it at a planetary scale. We see it in our daily lives, and we also see it at work as well. We're living in the Anthropocene, and a time of crisis has arrived, and the kind of thinking and acting that's got us here is really insufficient. And when you look to, the COP, for instance, they've been going since, I don't know, was it 1995? And the trajectory is unchanged, despite all of these meetings. Nothing has happened, yeah? And it's a classic It's a classic example of, I don't know, craziness. It's insanity. Yeah, collectively, as a species, we are insane. Yeah. And in turbulent conditions, the measure of intelligence is not speed or scale, but coherence with life. Yeah? And we've just not got it as a species. Individually, may have, but as a species, no. So I think we need help. We also see this in our programs and projects as well. This was from the GHAS report back in 1995 by the Standish Group, who regularly produced these publications. But something they said back in 1995 is still very much true. And I see this at work, and I see this not just at Airbus, I see it in a lot of big organizations. If you look at all of the programs and projects that we work on across the industry, not just in defense and space, but also in power and infrastructure and everything, almost all of our projects fail to meet time, quality, and cost. All of them. Yeah? And the more complex it is, the worse it gets. But what the Standish Group were telling us back in 1995 is that the technical problems are just a thin slice. The problems that we have in our programs and projects they represent our inability for us to be able to put together the organization necessary to deal with the complexity of the technical project. Again, it comes back to Ashbury's Law and some of the things we were talking about earlier. We are rubbish at putting together the necessary organizations to deliver our programs and projects. There are lots of reasons for that. Lack of complete life perspective, for instance, over-promises made during the pre-contract phase, but they laid the foundations for our failure. Bogdanov said back in 1917, a disordered whole is practically less than the sum of its parts, and we see that all the time in our organizations. The other thing I had a realization of a few days ago is that nature builds complexity. We build complicatedness. So, lovely publication from a coalition of INCOSE, PMI, and MIT a few years ago. It was the Guide to Lean Enablers in Managing Engineering Programs. It's really worth a read. It's freely available on the internet. And there's this really nice diagram, which is a multiple cause and effect diagram, which again emphasizes all of these different root causes of disasters in projects, which lead to firefighting. And when you trace it all back, there's actually quite a heavy dependency on poor acquisition and contracting practices. So we start off with a poor understanding of the problem, a poor understanding of the solution, and we make many, many assumptions. We're very, very optimistic. There's the way that we do business forces us to do those things. The salespeople, of course, who are largely responsible for those first phases, they're motivated to get the contract at any price because they get paid on revenue. They get their bonuses on revenue. They don't care about profitability. So, you're basically giving them the keys to make themselves rich and make their companies poor. And when we get the contract, there's this kind of culture which comes into place. Oh, let's just work harder and it'll just work out. Yeah, it's completely wrong. We know that the things when you start off a contract and it's already in a bad way, it's almost impossible to get it back on track. You can never really recover. All you can do is mitigate the damage. And I've been on so many projects like that. One thing I will say about Airbus is we always deliver quality products at the end. It may take us more time. It may take us a hell of a lot more than we thought, but we will get there at the end. Did some work in an GHAS conference that Peter ran, Peter Tunlam, a few years ago, and we did an exercise with a very diverse group of people. We asked them to consider what are the features of being non-systemic and what are the features of being systemic. We clustered all the non-systemic aspects into this cluster of 12 system pathologies, and through further, let's say, verification, validation of this stuff, and the clustering that we have here, these are essentially the starting point for understanding the general human activity system. We've got in the bottom left-hand quadrant, we've got pathologies which are related to essentially a lack of understanding of the overall problem and situation. Top left, you've got things that the viable system model, for instance, help us to understand, to provide those organizational structures that we need to appreciate complexity. That's top left. Top right is things that are more related to things that are in keeping with systems dynamics. And the bottom right, it's about the actual tangible systems that are created. It's a really nice overlay onto the Kinefin diagram, if any of you are familiar with that. So perceived chaos, perceived complexity, perceived complicatedness, and perceived clear. It aligns really nicely. So when we look at the global human social system, and this draws on the work from Tyler Volk, who created a really nice book, Quarks to Culture. And he looked at 12 grand leaps of, let's say, complexity, going all the way from quarks up to culture. And towards the top, he had these three layers. Cultural metagroups, which are basically tribal cultures who haven't yet set down roots. That then leads to agro-villages where society is starting to build roots, have a fixed point. With that you get agriculture, for instance, and then those agro-villages then start to scale up to more sort of feudal structures, which start to create wider networks, which lead to geopolitical states and ultimately nations. Yeah. Now, it's interesting. So what Tyler talks about, he talks about a process called combogenesis, which is where parts at a lower level come together to make a higher level, and at that higher level there are emergent properties which arise. And in each of these squares, you've got constraints on the parts, benefits for the parts, you've got the emergent property, and also affordances for new relationships. And those new relationships then provide the basis for that higher level combination. So at agro-villages, we've got crops, and crops then provide the basis for exchange to start to bring the agro-villages together. Yeah, so they start to combine through trade. And what you also find in those levels is that you get subsystems that develop, technology subsystems which develop in each of those levels as well. So where we are at the moment, we've got megacities, multinational corporations, 1%, global economy. These are kind of things which are evolving at that top level. Now, what we see is that the way we've been acting might have been okay 40, 50 years ago, but now we've got to the point where it's just not stable anymore. We've hit those limits to growth, yeah? And now we're seeing all of these pathologies. So roots in locale has actually led to a fragility. We've got poverty for the many, we've got unfair trade, we've got monocultures replacing our more indigenous approaches to agriculture. Yeah, we're very, very brittle at that level now. And then when you get to the next level, you're looking at the geopolitical states. We've got massive debt and profit. We've got a society of convenience. We've got subjugation of not the 1%, and we've got uncontrolled growth. And this is just not sustainable. So to deal with these kind of problems, we need to be applying a systems approach. And this is why there is this outpouring of appreciation and understanding that systems thinking and systems approaches are absolutely vital to get us out of, or to help steer us through this mess that we've created. Yeah? The situation demands a new level of intelligence. Yeah? And I would put it to you that because of the rate of change, because of the massive amount of information that we have to deal with, we can't do this on our own anymore. Yeah? We need augmented intelligence to support us. And we also need augmented intelligence to help tell us when we're doing stupid stuff. Yeah. So I think that system science and systems thinking is absolutely essential. And I think we as a systems field need to come together to bring together all of our diverse, rich knowledge as an integrated, genuine science and offer that to humanity. Yeah? And I think we have some genuine avenues for that now if we get our act together. Yeah? Because as individuals and as individual organizations, we're weak. Yeah? And we also lack credibility because we're all talking in different languages. Yeah? We've got to all come together as a coherent whole, because then we will have credibility and then we will have political leverage. Yeah? At the moment, we don't. So one of the things I've been working on is something called the general human activity system. And this is not, it's not a new theory, and it's not a new methodology. It's just a way of organizing stuff as a coherent whole. It's something I've been working on for probably about 6 or 7 years now, and Ruin's had some engagement in that. It is actually based on systemic foundations. It's based on the work of Rosen and John Kinnaman, for instance, in terms of the relational holon. And it also takes advantage of Bill Smith's appreciation, appreciation, influence and control framework. The overall structure for GHAS has what we call 9 transformational powers. These are the motivations of change within the overall space. There are 24 reversible pathways which lead to either systemic virtues or systemic pathologies. I've also been trying to identify actors within this overall framework which are typical in terms of the roles that we take. And it's very interesting to see the comparison with what Andrew was showing earlier. There's a lot of alignment. So I'm going to have a chat with Andrew and see if we can build on that. Now, the thing is, if we can understand all of the processes and all of the actors and all of the stuff that's going on in this overall framework, then we could potentially start to enlist AI to support us in identifying the weaknesses in our various activity systems. And some of you are probably aware, you may be already starting to feel this, but in our organizations are also changing, or at least they say they are, moving from documentation-based ways of working to digital ways of working. And the dream is that all of our infrastructure and our ways of working will actually be digitalized. We'll have digitalized environments that are integrated to support our ways of working. Yeah. Now that would provide a rich set of metrics and resources to provide information to AI systems to guide us on better business intelligence and better potentially planetary intelligence. So I think that GHAS may provide a framework that we can use for that as a starting point. And it is based on scientific concepts and general system models. But the other thing that's interesting is that when you look at some of the classic, well understood methodologies like DSM, systems dynamics, critical system heuristics, and soft systems methodology, they all nicely, I think, fit into this overall frame. And what I'd like to have a conversation with you about is when we look at the, I'll come on to this in a little while, when we come on to the products that are engaged in this general human activity system, how well does that top left quadrant relate to what you would expect to get out of VSM when you're applying it? So the way the model is, the way the overall framework is built up, so you can see political motivators of decision-making motivators. They're two of the powers at a human level. So decision-making and political, they're two powers which are utilised to drive processes. We've got processes which act towards being systemic, and we've got processes which lead to pathologies, anti-systemic processes. So here we've got two processes balanced across perspectives and navigate with discernment, which leads to ethical alignment in this context. What we've also got is two anti-systemic processes. One is optimized fragments over wholeness, what we might call corruption, for instance. And we've got evade systemic feedback, which is basically ignoring information and pretending everything's fine. Everything is green, it's okay. And that leads to distorted systemic direction. And you can see some of the typical roles that people play in those spaces. The mediators, the bridge builders, the arbiters, the diplomats, stewards, wise elders, sentinels, shepherds, judges, spin doctors, misleaders, false prophets, agenda drivers, Pied Piper, greedy politicians, heads of silos. And there's 24 of these different arrangements, and they all work together as a system. Now, the interesting thing is that, again, drawing on the Tao Te Ching, for those who are familiar with it, that, without the dark, there is no light. Without evil, there is no good. And ultimately, these pathologies may actually be the drivers for change, and the emergence, for instance, of a higher level of consciousness. Now, this gives me personal hope because I can see all of the trouble and the mess that's out there, and I'm hoping that this is all going to help us to wake up and actually start to act differently as a society, because we really can't continue like this. So I'm hoping that this is just part of our natural evolution, where we grow up as a species. And I do think that AI can help. Just let me check if the slide. Yes, it is. The slide I'm waiting for is down there. Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting is that originally I thought that this session was going to be 15 minutes. And I got to my hotel room last night at 11 o'clock, looked again at the agenda and thought, oh, I've got an hour. So if some of this isn't quite coming together yet in terms of coherence, that's the reason why. But it's all there. So I think that we need AI to help us to navigate these virtues and these pathologies, to help us understand where we're going off track. Within the overall frame, there are 12 virtues, and there are also 12 systemic roles. And I think what I'm finding through the various research is that one of the reasons why we're struggling in some of our organisations is because some of those roles are actually being downplayed because of the cultures in the organisations. The innovators, the visionaries, what you would call it from Kelvin, the monitor evaluators. The voices from these people are being downplayed deliberately because of the cultures in the organisations, and we're just out of balance. And I think that AI, if it were acting in this new digital world, could help to tell us when we've got problems with these voices being suppressed. But in order for this to work, we've got to find a way of ensuring that the AI is acting ethically. There's a really nice talk by Mick Ashby a few years ago. Again, someone we sadly lost not that long ago. But he was looking at ethical regulators of AI, and that was really good. The one, I'd say, deficiency of the paper that he put forward was that he assumed that the AI was enforcing ethical laws. And the problem is that we know that a lot of the laws are not actually ethical. So we need to also have AI helping us in that other space as well. It's all very well working on the right-hand side of the GHAS, but we need help over here as well. And so we need something to help guide that ethical activity by the AI. Otherwise, we're going to end up with lots of problems. Because if the AI isn't working ethically, then that Ava smile aspect could turn out to be a real problem. AI is either going to really help us or it's going to get rid of us. So I'm proposing something called the 3 laws of humanics, and this is essentially ethics for systemic intelligence. It's built on something that I really started thinking about back on cyber systemic possibilities for the Anthropocene, which was something that Ray Eisen headed up about 7 or 8 years ago now, I think it was. And myself and Bridget Daniel Allegro, who I used to work with quite closely, we both attended that event. And what was clear from the discussions was that in order to enact the change that we wanted across the planet, we needed to have a different set of values. And kind of jokingly, I said, well, if we look at the 3 laws of robotics, maybe we need to think about that from a humanistic perspective. And I later revisited this maybe a couple of years ago when I started to see the relationship between holarchy and fit, form, and function, which is a classic engineering heuristic. So you have form, which is basically the form of things. You have the fitness, which is how that part satisfies the greater whole. And then in between, you've got the functions that are provided towards the greater whole. So those 3 things, fit, form, and function, help to provide, I think, the basis for the 3 laws of humanics. So the first law is basically create value for life in service to the whole, and that's fit. Yeah. The next one is nurture relationships in the right relationship, and that's essentially functions. So value and empathize and nurture relationships is essentially the second law. The third law is fulfill your potential. Yeah. Respect yourself and fulfill your full potential. And that relates to form. Yeah. And this isn't just something for the AI, this is something that we need to live to as well, if we're going to achieve that kind of society that we really need, which is in keeping with the planetary whole. Because if we don't respect the planet and our constraints, then the planet will get rid of us.
Is that fit, form, function? Is that a recognised triplet?
It is, yeah.
It sort of defies form, follows function, literally, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. That's related to that as well. So it was something that came out of actually military thinking about 30 or 40 years ago, when they were looking at replacement parts. Yeah, in order to provide a replacement part when something goes obsolete, you have to consider its form, its fit, and its function. But this is something that has grown beyond that. It's now a fairly well-known engineering heuristic that we have to take into account in all of our architectures. And it becomes even more meaningful when you get into that big systems of system space, when you're looking at how your technological systems meet the needs of an overall organization. It was something that we took into account in the border security solutions, for instance. So the GHAS provides a really useful framework for understanding the overall integration of processes and powers and roles that need to take place in an overall space. But one of the things that VSM does is it provides a scaffold for all of those different layers that we see in our social ecological systems. Yeah, all the way up. And then with fit, form, and function, we get a better integrated whole for practice. Because the fit, form, function, as I mentioned, it helps us to understand the ethics and also the qualities of the solutions that we need to provide. Okay, so when we look at all of the different pathways, the 24 pathways in an integrated way, what we can now start to see is what are the outcomes of being systemic from an organisational perspective. You know, when we're putting in place organisations and when we're doing what organisations do, which is creating and delivering products, for instance, we can map all of our processes, whether they're project management or organisational management or systems engineering. They all map onto this space. Yeah. And what we can also do is we can see how some of our, as I mentioned, well applied and understood methodologies from a system perspective also fit onto this map. Yeah. Now, what was interesting, this alignment of these methodologies, it's also been highlighted by Gerald Minchley, yeah, and also Andreas Hieronymi in his paper several years ago made these same distinctions. Now, when I was asking the AI to produce a drawing showing the alignment of methodologies with the GHAS, it chose these. I didn't choose that. Yeah. Yeah.
One can ask critical questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I'd like to do is if we look at that space on the top left, are these typically the things that you would associate with the application of the viable system model? Are these the things that it helps you with? So I'm aware of the VSM, but I wouldn't say I'm a practitioner. Yeah. Conceptual frameworks, general principles, architectures, organizations, structures, what to achieve, roles and responsibility, commitments, vision, mission, objectives, plans. I think you start to touch on the dynamic models, but I think there's a correlation which is useful to go from your VSM and then start to combine that with your systems dynamics, your stocks and flows, your multiple cause and effect diagrams. How do those viable systems then act in terms of their processing and their utilization of resources?
Just a question. You have two SSMs, right?
Oh, damn it! That's a copy-paste. That should be
yeah.
system dynamics. Yeah. I did that this morning at 6.
But for the VSM people, lessons learned feedback, which is there on the right-hand side.
Bottom right, yeah.
Bottom right. Isn't that something that's really central to VSM? And that's you can read this is and not is.
Yeah.
So if it's there at CSH, one can from CSH. Oh.
Yeah.
But does that mean it's not in VSM? I know your answer. Your answer would be it's more in CSH than it is in VSM. But if I look at resolutions, emancipation, if I assumed SSM to be in this corner, I might feel it's more in
CSH.
So what I ask you to do is to read this not in one direction, because it does make sense in one direction. But the moment you read it from the other direction, there's a bit of uneasiness.
Yeah. No, I think what's really important is that all of these techniques start to look at their strengths and dependencies with the other parts, so that you start to get them all working together. Yeah. And there are a load of other methodologies as well, which are all in our toolkit that we need to integrate.
Are we talking about building a toolkit, or are we talking about a kind of synthesis going on? I'm mindful of electromagnetic history. Electrostatics and magnetics. You needed a Maxwell to come along and say, there you go.
Yeah.
Maxwell's equation. So something analogous to that, where you're seen from some kind of gestalt, you start to recognize something which is common and actually is the thing of which these are just aspects.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, no, you're right. So the value of this kind of overall framework is we can start to see where things are kind of logically placed, yeah, in the overall map, and you can start to compare like with like in those particular areas, and you can start to synergize rather than compete, yeah, because there's a lot of competition in terms of methodologies and tool sets out there in our space, but it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be competing, yeah. So one of the pathologies is competition overriding collaboration. Yeah, that's one of the pathologies.
One of the things I find very helpful with the viable system model is to insist on multiple interpretations in a workshop.
Yeah.
And the viable system model also is recursive, so every aspect is contained and contains. And sometimes I start by drawing a kind of a sunburst diagram with the system and focus in the middle, and then ask how many recursive structures is this particular system and focus embedded in. And it could be like a business improvement association. And the only thing they care about is, do your signs and your hours conform to what we've decided? They don't care what you stock. They don't care, how you treat your employees. Somebody else treats, the labor law cares about how you treat your employees, et cetera, et cetera. And usually there's about 6 of them. And usually when people are asked to distinguish between system 1 activities, they can do it on at least 3, but often 4 or 5 different distinctions.
Yeah.
So it could be jurisdiction, it could be locality, it could be user, et cetera. And I think that one of the really best things about doing a good BSN analysis is it tells you what else you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it doesn't cover everything. And Stafford Windenburg said that it did, but it does cover quite a lot. And then it tells you where to look next to cover the rest.
Yeah.
Or at least it hints.
Yeah. I think so. Again, you're absolutely, an authority on this compared to me, who's only got, a little understanding. But from what I understand, VSM provides an architecture in terms of all of the things that you really should have to have a viable system. I'm not sure if VSM comes with a methodology, for instance, for lessons learned. It says you need to have lessons learned as part of your structure, but it doesn't provide the mechanism for that.
Well, system 2 should be documenting that.
Yeah. But out of the box of VSM, you don't get a lessons learned method.
No, not specifically.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You see, Gary, what Lena's point can be made exactly for all these 4 methodologies. All 4, and this is my discussion with Gerald as well, and I don't want to be clouding the issue. I think it's very important, let me say, first of all, your work is fantastic in bringing the conversation. But what I always tell Gerald and everything, trying to do to cluster it, is that all these methodologies attempt to see the big picture. And by stating, by the moment when you do not acknowledge that VSM has all the ability to see the big picture, that SSM, you are for the moment an SSM guy, sees the big picture like CSH sees the big picture, then you alienate people, because then you create actually division instead of what you really want to, what you want to achieve. So and that makes the challenge bigger. Not it is. So we really want to do something like this, but we don't want to be told that the focus of our methodology is rather on this, when we know the focus of our methodology, if done correctly, is on the whole story. And I think that's what we should overcome.
Is that what you're saying? Because what I think of is slightly different.
No, please.
I was watching a Japanese TV channel once. It's gone off TV now, sadly. And there's a very old Japanese man, right? And he makes things with wood. And in his tool shed, he had so many tools, right? And he made many of them himself. Right? And then he got a tool, and this tool was just for carving a particular shape that he wanted to carve. And then when he'd got it, he put it back on the shelf very carefully and then carried on. And I think somehow, rather than the sense of this being an exosystem that's scaffolding itself around VSM or anything like that, instead I think this is almost like that toolmaker shed where someone comes along and they say we want to do a VSM analysis or whatever. And as an example, CSH might be a really great way. So 3 of its aspects might be a great way of thinking about the different aspects, well, particularly where you're missing one. And if you think I'm missing the ethical one, then CSH is a great method now for you to be able to give effect to your need to fill in and think more about the ethical aspect to get a better VSM. Does that help? Is that kind of way you
Yeah,
think?
that is what we are aiming, but and that's how I see it as well. That's where the potential is. But still, if one practices these methods, I just don't like the boxes. I don't like the being.
But there is still this old Japanese man, right? He has to know which tool is the right tool for the thing that he wants. So he develops over years as a practitioner, and he has to know the difference between a router and something else, right? And that's kind of what this is. When you look at it, the apprentice looks at this and goes, "What are all these tools?"
Right, I think I've only got 10 minutes left, so I've got a couple of things I'd still like to say. Yeah, so reimagining the global system. So this is helping to do some rebalancing, yeah? So when we get down to the micro villages, we need regenerative routes, regenerative agriculture, and one answer to that is permaculture. At the IEEE conference next week, we've got Emma Kumar, who's giving a wonderful talk on regenerative agriculture in India, where he's developed essentially a pattern which can be reapplied across the local level, which then scales up, which is really interesting. We need resiliency at that level. We need sustainable cooperation. I think we need more local stuff going on. Yeah, more local utilization of food rather than transporting it all around. It's just crazy. We can't afford to do that really. And then we need different life values. We need meaningful purpose at that higher level. We need to make our leaders accountable. Yeah. And we need to recognize mutual dependencies at that global level, because we can't continue to be up. And then what might the next level look like? If we go up from geopolitical states next to the next level, which we've got Gaia, yeah, planetary protection, because we're at risk of asteroids and meteoroids at the moment, wiping us all out. That's something we need to be thinking about, believe it or not. Let's imagine the world that we'd really like to have, and then maybe move towards it. So the big picture is that we are potentially becoming Gaia's cognitive function, yeah, and I think that AI has a part to play in that. AI, however, without the ethical awareness, could potentially become a massive planetary pathology, especially from our perspective. Yeah. I think we really do need AI as a partner in our systemic evolution. We're becoming Gaia's cognition if we choose coherence over fragmentation, essentially. And that's the key message. Again, the call to systemic collaboration. Metaforum, the IEEE, and all of our sister and brother organisations, we need to bring them all together as a coherent whole if we're going to answer the call of society and the call of the planet. And I think we've got a massive amount of wisdom, and we need to find a way of bringing that all together as a coherent whole to address the problems that we have. That's essentially it.
Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, one question. How can AI teach us how to use AI appropriately?
Well, we could ask it. I've been training my instance of ChatGPT for about 1.5 years now. Systemic frameworks. It's been helping me to create a number of papers. I submitted a paper last year, and the journal said it was too big and too complicated, and I've split it into 4 now. Yeah. The first paper, which is basically the meta framework for organising our knowledge about systems, that's going through the SRBS at the moment. But another paper which is on the general human activity system, and then there's a paper about using GHAS and AI at the planetary level. And the 4th paper I'm working on, which I'm going to talk about next week, is on a framework which I'm calling the GRASP, the General Relational Architecture of Systemic Processes. And it draws on Len Troncali's work, turning his isomorphies into a system of system patterns, if you like. And it also takes into account the work of Miller and his purposeful subsystems. So this is genuinely an attempt at a system of system processes which are transversal to every kind of system, from the atomic all the way up to social systems. Right?
One of the applications that interests me, AI, is in the communication of the complexities of systems thinking. You've probably been seeing the posts that I've been seeing about using AI to tell stories using CLD as the framework. We're in the same LinkedIn group. So I think that's another big component. Yes, you've got to get the academic integrity, but actually it's not going to be something done in serial. These are going to be concurrent activities in terms of the communication. So one of the types of people we need on this team are the communicators, the journalists, the people whose job they eat and breathe both public sentiment and their communications within that context. And I don't see if anybody here who's a secret journalist. Yeah, I think we're missing.
Yes, I'm not a journalist, but yesterday I was presenting at something called Connect to Change, which is an initiative which is all about essentially our built infrastructure in the UK. There's a new department which has been set up, and they've been given the task of looking at the long-term future of our built infrastructure in the UK. They've got a budget of £50 billion to cover the next 10 years, and they're trying to potentially ensure a systemic approach to our infrastructure.
Right. I mean, I work in the energy sector, so electricity is kind of front and centre at the minute. So it'd be really interesting to talk about.
I can choose. They've got a publication. So by chance, Mark Enser started an initiative a couple of years ago, which was about developing a shared understanding of systems thinking in the built environment. I got involved in this about 9 months ago. So the ISSS has contributed, also the IFSR, and they did a hard launch of this initiative called Connect to Change yesterday, and the head of the agency, of the new agency, spoke in essentially at the beginning of the session, as did Mark. But then there was 2 sets of panels, and the panel I was on was for 4 different communities. One was essentially a community representing finance. There was another from consultants, another from education, and I was labelled essentially representing system specialists, engineers, system scientists, systems practitioners. And the consultant was talking about the need to be able to communicate this stuff effectively at all different levels, and some ideas about how to do that. So we have a genuine opportunity as a community to feed into that collective, because they desperately want what we have, but they need to be advised on what is good, what works, how it all joins up together, and also in a language which is appropriate for execs all the way through the management chain down to the people who do the work. So they will help us to do that, and we really do have a forum now where we can start to engage. Yeah. So we and Angela and Marilyn and Elena, they all know about this. We've been hosting. The ISSS has been helping to host it. We don't see ourselves as the owners of all of this by any means, but we've been trying to help to facilitate a conversation and a sharing across all of the systems organisations. So Metaphor have been involved, Systems Dynamics, Encosi, OR. Yeah. So we've been holding events every couple of months, inviting people to come and talk about their organisations and their aims and their opportunities and their problems and things that they'd like help with. And if we can take that and then apply that as a way of getting into and engaging with the built infrastructure people, and I think we've got a very powerful way of having our knowledge utilised.
So just to build on that, in keeping with AI requires domain specialists to actually ground it in something which is trustworthy.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're also talking about, is getting the right kind of interfaces with the various domains of application, of know-how, so that we actually do form part of that grid. That's really, really tight.
Yeah. Okay, so the opportunity really is there. Yeah.
Sorry, behind this framework, do you have some sort of methodology to use it or to apply or to understand it better?
Well, so the way I've been constructing this is simply based on what we do in terms of architecting solutions. Yeah, so as a systems engineer and as a systems architect, even before I encountered system science, it was what I did. Yeah. Now, because I have a better awareness of system science, I can actually see, oh, now I understand why I'm doing that. Now this is why I organise things in this way. Now I understand now why I focus on functions and how those things fit towards operating needs and how interfaces work and all of this. Yeah. So I've been applying system science in terms of system principles in the building model itself. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.